I dressed as a priest once. By boewhiskey. It really wasn't my idea to dress like a priest for Halloween a couple of years ago. A girl I briefly dated decided to dress like a typical slutty nun and thought it would be a fun couple idea for me to dress as a priest. I agreed because she specified that I would be an undead priest and the idea sounded a lot better than my typical lack of costume. We went to a party one of our mutual friends threw and I, of course, got absolutely wasted. My girlfriend disappeared at some point, so when I was ready to walk home, I found myself walking alone, thinking I wasn't drunk enough to warrant calling a cab or getting a rideshare or seeing if any of my sober friends would take me home. I know, you're probably already thinking, big mistake. And you're right. I had walked home inebriated many times before, though, so I really had no reason to think this would be any different. By the time I was about 2 blocks away, the sidewalk beneath my feet started to tilt and sway. I knew I needed to sit down at least for a few minutes before I continued. And that is how I found myself sitting on the steps of a church, dressed in a priest's outfit, at almost 2 in the morning. Looking back, I cringe at how cliché and ironic it was. My elbows were on my thighs and my hands cradled my head as I stared at the concrete below, focused on my breathing. I noticed footsteps rapidly approaching but didn't move or think much of it until they stopped a few feet away from me and something fell to the ground. I glanced up and saw a girl standing there, looking at the church doors, a backpack at her feet. She was breathing harder than normal but not quite panting yet, as if she had only started running. I lifted my head slowly and looked at her completely. She was dressed in a sundress made up to have blood and dirt stains on it, along with her long blonde hair and exposed skin. As I tried to think of what her costume might be, she picked the backpack up and walked to the heavy wooden doors. She gripped the handle of one and tugged. Nothing happened. She tugged again and then tried the other door with the same result. "You're out of luck, the doors are usually locked by 10 or 11, I think," I called to her. I turned my head a little to try and see her in my periphery without having to turn my queasy body to do so. She whipped around to look at me, momentary panic on her face. She stared at me for a moment, then nodded and walked calmly over to me and sat down. She set the bag between her feet in front of her and unzipped it, pulling out a lighter and a pack of cigarettes. Without a word, she offered me one and I shook my head. She paused as if remembering something suddenly and then nodded, placing her cigarette between her lips and lighting it. She took a deep drag and then finally spoke. "I don't mean to bother you, Father, but I need to make a confession and I need it to be now," she said. I looked at her face and saw her staring off in the distance. She was young, I could tell that much, and obviously missed the fake blood and ghoulish makeup I was wearing somehow. She actually thought I was a priest. Maybe it was the alcohol or seeing the distressed and haunted look on her face that kept my mouth shut, but either way, I made the decision on the spot to not correct her. If someone needed to confess about sneaking out and going to a party on Halloween, who was I to deny them a little solace? She probably was just feeling guilty over going against her parents' wishes or something, and so what if I wasn't a real priest? I could fake it for a few minutes and give her some peace of mind, so long as I didn't end up vomiting. I nodded solemnly, putting on my best priest act. "What is it you need to say, my child?" She held the cigarette in her mouth as she reached down and pulled her shoes off, dropping them haphazardly to the side. Then she stood up, looking at the ground in what I assumed was a shy manner. "So, Father, I'm 16 and I've lived a less than pristine life. But I've been trying, I really have. I've been good, and I got myself a job and a place to live that isn't on the streets. I even have been going to school, trying to graduate and all. I've really been working hard, you know? Keeping my head down, minding my business, just moving forward without causing waves or even ripples. I met a guy, Father, a great guy. He moved in with me and we were living a happy life, a quiet life, a good life," she said. Her last few words trailed off as she became obviously deep in thought and started to pace, her bare feet making almost no noise on the pavement. "Go on," I gently urged. She stopped pacing suddenly and faced me. For the first time, she looked me directly in the eyes and I felt instantly compelled to give her my undivided attention, nausea be damned. She held my gaze and smoked on her cigarette. "Do you mind if I take off my dress?" she asked. The inflection in her voice and her hands suddenly moving to pull the thin straps off of her shoulders told me that it was more of a rhetorical question, so I simply stared, dumbfounded at this girl's actions. My mind was a steady stream of expletives and questions as she disrobed right there on the sidewalk. I didn't plan it. I really didn't. It wasn't something that had ever even crossed my mind, you see, but I just had to bury him, she said once the dress had fallen to the ground around her feet. It took me a few seconds to focus on what she had spoken, but once I did, I only felt my confusion deepen. "Bury him?" I asked. Yes, about 8 feet in the ground, she said, kicking the dress to land on top of the shoes she had tossed aside. So you understand why I'm asking you to talk to God for me? Let him know I didn't mean to. What exactly do you mean by bury him? I asked. This had to be some joke, right? Some Halloween prank or something. You see, she took one final puff from her cigarette and tossed it toward the street. She then leaned forward and I pulled back, bracing myself with my hands on the step behind me. She gripped my legs just above my knees and blew the smoke out in my face. I found him with another woman in our bed. My bed. The bed that I paid for and I made for him. So I had to find a place in soft ground and dig a hole. I had to give him a new bed once I was done punishing him. I tried to not feel nervous about her proximity or her story of killing her boyfriend. She held my gaze and I noticed her eyes were a soft blue color with a gold ring around the pupil. I found myself unable to look away. The longer I stared into her unblinking eyes, I started to lose my senses. First, my sight of anything but her blurred, leaving me with a sort of tunnel vision. Next, the sound of distant traffic and city noises faded away, leaving only auditory blankness. I think this is when my body went numb, but honestly, I didn't even notice it until later. A new smell began to permeate my nostrils. It smelled flowery but sweet enough to be sickening and left an ashy taste in my mouth when I involuntarily tried breathing with it open. Father, your breathing has changed. Are you feeling okay? The girl asked. She continued staring deep into my eyes and I felt one of her hands start creeping up my leg ever so slowly. This was when I noticed that my body was numb, all except where she touched me. Maybe we can work something out in exchange for you helping me with the Almighty. My eyes were still glued to hers, and I watched helplessly as the golden rings began to pulse and stretch in strands across the blue iris. I wanted to move, to yell, to push her away, hell, to breathe at my own command, but I was a prisoner to her, wholly and completely. From the second she had touched me, I could feel that something was not right. Something primal inside of me was gripped with pure fear, but I felt like a caged animal. As I lost myself in the steady, measured beats of the gold, visions began to appear in my mind. There was the girl, dressed as she had been when I first saw her, except clean. She was unlocking a door and opening it to a studio apartment. I saw a man and another woman in bed. There was a blinding flash that hurt my eyes, even though it had come from behind them. I shut my eyes tight and winced. There was another vision, the man, naked, on his knees in what looked like some woods or a park or something. The girl was there, too, holding a large knife to his throat. No, wait, it. Another flash and I saw his lifeless body, limp on the ground, being carved into with, yes, a knife. It was a knife. But the hand gripping it wasn't human. The fingers extended too far and the nails were thick, curved slightly, and sharper than naturally possible. There were slices in his skin already and I could tell she had mutilated certain sensitive parts of his body. Flash. I saw a different person, an older man. He was yelling at what appeared to be a younger version of the girl in front of me. Flash. This new man was on his back, desperately trying to shimmy away from her along the floor. Her hands were warped and inhuman again as she held a bloody hammer loosely in her grip. Her hand tightened around it and she lifted her arm. Flash. The girl, even younger again, was staring in the mirror. She had bruises on her upper arms and she was crying. Her hands gripped the sink as she spit out blood and shakily turned on the water to wash it down the drain. Flash. She was looking from her reflection to behind her and back again. There was something dark in the mirror, a figure in a humanoid shape. It was like a dark silhouette that only showed in the reflection. I got the impression that the shadow thing was speaking to her, as her facial expression changed, and her mouth moved to form words, even though I heard none. The reflection of the thing reached out and held her reflection's shoulder, in an almost lovingly way. It nodded, its face turned to look down on her. Her mouth opened wide in a scream as her hands changed and I saw bones on the child's back pop and move and shift. It looked horribly painful and I wanted to cry out to her, to scream at that being that she was just a child. I couldn't speak, though, and I knew I wasn't really there. Right before a final flash that brought me back to the current scene, I saw that shadow look up. Pinpricks of honey gold pulsed and grew larger, forming into the shape of bright eyes, and I swear it looked right at me. There was one final, blinding white flash of pain and I came back to reality, immediately heaving myself to the side and throwing up the entire contents of my stomach. Over the sound of my retching, I heard the girl's voice from in front of me. "How did you do that?" she demanded. I didn't respond but looked at her in exhausted confusion once my internal exodus was finished. She was standing straight, a couple of steps back from me, and glaring at me with panic and hatred burning in her eyes. In an instant, she was on me, gripping my thighs tight with those claw-like hands that I had seen, and her face barely an inch away from mine. She snarled, and I saw that her teeth were sharper than I realized before, or they had become sharper in whatever kind of transformation her hands also underwent. "You shouldn't have been able to see more than I wanted to show you. Is this some sort of power of God?" she asked. Her voice was lower than before and had almost a gravelly tone to it. The anger seemed to radiate off of her. The honeyed gold in her eyes glowed like an amber fire ready to lash out and envelope me. "What the hell are you?" I countered. Her visage continued to change, her face appearing more gaunt and sharp. I thought I could hear the sound of large wings flapping nearby. She didn't move for a moment that felt like it lasted at least half a lifetime. My heart pounded in my ears and I began to wonder if I would pass out before she enacted her fury on me. With a final squeeze of my thighs, one that I would later find drew blood, she stood up, eyes closed, and rolled her neck one way and then the other, then her shoulders. She opened her eyes and they were back to the calm blue with a slender golden, not pulsating, ring around the pupil. Her lips curved into a smile and the altered appearance faded away, leaving the young, innocent-looking girl she was when she first walked up. "Do you think anyone can be saved, Father?" she asked me. "Yes," I said with a stammer. "I need to be saved, Father," she said. I wasn't sure how to respond and my mind raced, trying to find what to say to keep her peaceful and tell her what she might want to hear. "Do you regret what you did? Will you repent?" I finally asked. "You know," she tapped her chin with two fingers and paused, picking up her backpack and reaching inside, retrieving a t-shirt. As she pulled it over her head, she continued, "At first I didn't feel bad. I knew that he got what he deserved. But then after a few hours, I started to feel something. There was this itch. An itch I tried to scratch but I couldn't quite get to." "Guilt?" I asked her as she pulled a pair of jeans out of her bag then dropped it back on the ground. No, a deeper itch. "You know what I mean, Father, you must feel it a lot, even if you don't really know what it is," she said. Before she put the pants on, she stepped forward again and placed her hands on my knees, one fist clenched around the jeans, the other lightly placed on me. She bit her lip and traced a finger up my inner thigh. I coughed and shifted uncomfortably on the step. With a sly and sultry smile, she stood again and began stepping into her pants and pulling them up. As she dressed, she said, nonchalantly, "He was the best I ever had. I regret losing that." I really was at a loss for words and could only blink at her. She cocked her head to the side and looked me up and down, like a predator sizing up its prey. "Say, Father, what do you say we find somewhere a little more private and give it a go? If he can forgive me for my trespasses, I'm sure you'll be forgiven too. Or, if I really am going to hell, you can keep me company," she said. She approached me once more and leaned close enough that I could feel her breath on my ear as she spoke. "Just put in a good word with the big man and I'll show you what lust and greed really are. I'm already on the run, why not give me something else to repent and remember?" "Whoa, stop," I said, grabbing her waist and pushing her to be at arm's length from me. "Am I not pretty enough for you, Father?" she asked. Her voice warped from pure at the beginning of the question to spiteful at the end. No, I said, "You're only 16. There is so much about it that would be wrong. And sinful. I cannot do that to an innocent child like you." I felt myself spewing the words, trying to stay in character and sound at least somewhat priest-like or pious. She stood up straight and held my gaze. Her eyes were starting to pulse again and her expression was firm and determined. I felt myself beginning to panic again, but the sound of footsteps from the distance seemed to startle her. She whipped her head in the direction the sound was coming from and my own head followed slowly. We both saw a group of people walking down the street in our direction. They were laughing and talking with no idea as to what was going on here on the steps of this church. The girl looked back at me, calm again. Without a word, she bent down and pulled a pair of shoes out of her backpack. After removing a book of matches from inside one and a small bottle of lighter fluid from the other, she slipped them on. She doused the pile of clothes and the shoes she had been wearing with the fluid, then dropped the bottle on top and struck a match. Tucking it back into the fold of the matchbook, she tossed it at the very top, a flaming cherry on top of the mound. It didn't take more than a few seconds for it all to light up and begin burning. "Thanks for listening, dear Father," she said, leaning over and kissing my cheek. Then she walked away as if nothing had happened, glancing over her shoulder at me one last time before she turned a corner and vanished. I sat there for a little while longer, absent-mindedly watching the pile of clothes burn and then die out. Once it was done, I came back to my senses and continued my walk home. It was a strange encounter and left me a nervous wreck for a few days, but eventually faded into the background of my life within a few months. In those first few days, I saw a news story of a young woman being arrested after a brief search. The girl had mutilated and murdered her boyfriend. Even without seeing an image of who was arrested, I was sure it had to be her. At the very least, I hoped it was her. Knowing she was behind bars helped ease my mind as I moved on from that night. I would have left this terrible experience in the past and probably only remembered it when asked what the craziest thing I had been through was, but I received a letter in the mail yesterday. It has me on edge and I'm not sure what to do about it. It read as follows. Dear Father, have you missed me? They caught me for what I did and I've been locked away. Don't worry, though, I've been strong in taking it in stride. I prayed for what I did and I've forgiven myself. There is so much worse I've done since then, anyways. I think I'm overdue for a confession, a long one. Even though I know I'm going to hell, it couldn't hurt, right? I'd love to see you again, and I will be getting out soon. I'm looking forward to speaking with you again. Halloween night has been so long ago, but I've kept it fondly in my memories. I'll see you soon. Yours. The girl on the church steps. I have no idea how she's getting out soon if she went down for murder. I never gave her my name. I never gave her my address. I don't know how to process the fact that below her closing line there is a lip print in blood red lipstick. Thanks for listening. The link to the Reddit post are in the description below. And don't forget to like, comment and subscribe.